Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to be getting started in 3 minutes. So if you need the washroom, refill your drink, throw out your plate, whatever it is you might need to do to prepare yourselves, we'll be underway in a couple of minutes from now. Okay. Hi and welcome, everybody. It's great to see all of you. It's wonderful to have you here. We were very intentional in two aspects of today's programming decision-making. One was when we have members of our congregation who publish books, novels in particular, we're always very much inclined to work their work and themselves into our book club program. We're thrilled that we did so 2 years ago with Don Promislow, and that we're doing so this year with Nora Gold. The second intentionality is, of course, one of the two novellas that Nora has written that will be discussed today, Yom Kippur in a Gym. We wanted to make sure that we placed the discussion of that novel close to Yom Kippur. We couldn't do it before, but only now a couple of weeks after, so that that atmosphere, that feeling, the sense of your own experience this past year in that last hour or two of the day is fresh in your minds, such that in reading the book and in discussing the book, it will be hopefully a little bit more meaningful and relevant than if we did this review, say, in April. So those were two of our direct intentions. I do want to apologize about the temperature in the room. Apparently the heat is not on in the building yet, and the warm day outside hasn't made its way in, which means it will be hot in here on Saturday when it's cold again outside. You're more than welcome to keep your jackets on, grab another hot drink, whatever it is, but again, I'm sorry for that. And I just ask that you turn your phones on vibrate or silent so that we're not interrupted during the review today. Before we jump into the subject matter, Brent from Amica on the Avenue is here. We're so thankful that Amica on the Avenue is sponsoring all 3 sessions in our fall book club series. Amica is at, location again? Avenue in Eglinton. So very much in the neighborhood. We're thrilled that you're here. And Brent is going to reveal who's won today's gift basket. And if you have anything else to say, you're more than welcome to.
Not at all. I don't want to take up too much time, but I just wondered if anybody had any questions at all for me. Okay. So Amica is known for pardon me, wow. It's premier senior living. So we do offer very high levels of care, and we do have quite a few of our residents that are independent living. I will be available for questions afterwards, but please feel free to reach out to me, and most importantly, we will do the draw right now with Daniel's help.
Okay. We mixed it up?
Yes, yeah.
Already been mixed. Okay. Let's do this one. Congratulations, Loretto Cummings.
Very nice.
Come on down. Give this back.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
There you go.
I can bring it to her.
Sure.
Yeah. Danielle, I'll come to you.
Loretto, congratulations. Thank you, everybody, for participating. There'll be a next time. And thank you, Brent, for being here. So here's the plan for this afternoon. We have the privilege of what I call the reciprocal interview. 2 years ago, Dawn was interviewed by Nora. Today it'll be the reverse. And after the conversation and after questions, and for those of you online, you're welcome to put questions into the Zoom chat, and we'll make sure that they're posed in the room during question time. Afterwards, Nora's generously offered to stay at the registration table outside to sign books if you've brought your copy, to sell books if you'd like to purchase a copy for friends or family, whatever it might be, and then she'll be able to stick around. So I'm going to introduce Dawn, and then Dawn is going to introduce Nora. So Dawn Promislow is the author of the novel Juan, which was a finalist for the Canadian Authors Association's Fred Kerner Book Award in 2023, a Miramichi Best Fiction title of 2022, a CanLit Book Club pick in Zoomer Magazine, and a finalist in the design category for an Alberta Book Publishing Award 2023. How many of you read it? Juan, W-A-N. Okay, about a third of the room. And for the rest of you, I encourage you to go pick it up. Dawn's also the author of the short story collection Jewels and Other Stories, which was named one of the 8 best fiction debuts of 2011 and longlisted for the Frank O'Connor International Short Story Award in the same year. She's had numerous award-nominated short stories, poems, and essays published in literary journals in Canada, the US, and the UK. And Dawn has designed and led writing workshops at high schools, art museums, and with other groups, and spoken about writing at universities, libraries, book festivals, book clubs, and on CBC Radio Canada. She's writing a new novel, which you'll let us know when it's ready, and teaches creative writing at University of Toronto's School of Continuing Studies. Dawn Promislow and Dr. Nora Gold.
Thank you. Does this work? Works? No. Press mute. Oh, I should hold. Okay. Do you all hear me? Yes. Danielle, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And thank you for having us. Thank you for having me here as the privilege of talking about Nora's book, of which I'm a great fan. I'm a great fan of Nora's work. And so it's a very big honor and joy for me to be here and talk about Nora's book, which we'll do in a minute. And first, I'm going to just read Nora's bio, so just for those who don't know all the details about her. Dr. Nora Gold is the prize-winning author of 5 books, as well as an editor and a former professor. Her first book, Marrow and Other Stories, won a Vine Canadian Jewish Book Award and was praised by Alice Munro. Fields of Exile, the first and to date only novel about anti-Israelism on campuses, won the inaugural Canadian Jewish Literary Award for Best Novel and was acclaimed by Ruth Weiss and Irwin Cotler. The Dead Man was honored with the Canada Council for the Arts Translation Grant and was published in Hebrew in Israel. Her book 18, Jewish Stories Translated from 18 Languages, is an anthology of translated works that was published a year ago and was praised by Publishers Weekly, Cynthia Ozick, and Dara Horn. Gold's 5th and most recent book has been praised internationally. That's the one we're talking about today. That's the one we're lucky enough to talk about today. In addition, Gold is the founder and editor-in-chief of the prestigious online literary journal Jewish Fiction, which is www.jewishfiction.com, if you look it up. The only English language journal devoted exclusively to publishing Jewish fiction. In its first 14 years, Jewish Fiction has published 600 works of Jewish fiction, never before published in English, that were either written in English or translated from English into English from 21 languages. Jewish Fiction, as of last month, has an interactive website where readers can search for stories by theme, author, or original language, and this journal has readers in 140 countries. You should have a look at it. It's fantastic. Dr. Gold received her PhD from the University of Toronto and was a tenured professor until she left academia in the year 2000 in order to write fiction full-time. She holds both Canadian and Israeli citizenship, and she's the co-founder of 3 Canadian Zionist organizations, as well as a proud member of Beth Tzedec. For more information, she has a website at www.noragold.com. What did I say? www.noragold.com. And there you go. That's Nora's bio. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Dawn, for that lovely introduction. Thank you, Daniel, for inviting me. And thank you, Beth Tzedec. And thank you all for being here today.
So we're going to talk about this book, which is a very beautiful book physically, and we'll talk about that in a minute as well as quite an unusual book. It's a flip book, as you might know, meaning one side is one story and the other is another. So we're going to talk about the actual physicality of that book in a minute. But what is most arresting when I came across and read this book first is the form of the stories. There are 2 novellas in this book. In the covers of this book are 2 novellas. And what is a novella is very broadly defined as something between a short story and a novel. Novellas are very close to my own writerly heart. I actually love novellas. I find them very intriguing, precisely because of their form. And so I was quite entranced to be happy to read these 2 novellas. And so my first question for Nora is to do with this form, Nora. What is it that attracted you to this form? Because you've already written 2 short story collections and 1 novel. So what interests me is what brought you to the novel? Is it that that you were interested in the form, or that these stories lent themselves to the novella form? And what other novellas perhaps were your inspiration? Perhaps you're a big fan of them. I'm guessing perhaps you are. And that's my first question. In general.
Wonderful question. Thank you, Dawn. Well, I love novellas. I've always loved novellas. Is this sound okay? Yeah. As Dawn said, they're not novels, they're not short stories, they're something in the middle. They're sometimes not that respected. Not all publishers like to publish novellas because novels seem more impressive and short stories are now in fashion. But I love them because, to me, they embody the best of a short story and a novel. They have enormous power and range, like a novel, but at the same time, they have the intimacy and conciseness of a short story. And 2 of the first novellas I ever read were when I was in high school. One was in high school, one was in college. That just bowled me over. The first was The Dead by James Joyce, and then The Beast in the Jungle by Henry James. If you haven't read either of these or both, I'd recommend them highly. And I've loved novellas ever since. The novella I've read most recently is by Thomas Mann, and it's called Chaotic World and Childhood Sorrow. If any of you have read any Thomas Mann in translation, you won't have heard of it because it's a new title in a new book, a new translation by Damien Searles. The book is called Thomas Mann Selected Stories, and it's an extraordinarily beautiful novella. And I never really loved Thomas Mann before. I always liked Thomas Mann, but he's very heavy and ponderous. And in this translation, I fell in love with Thomas Mann, which tells me about the power of a good translation. I mean, it's a different Thomas Mann than I ever met before.
I'm going to interrupt for 1 minute to say that I'm a huge fan of his other novella, perhaps more famous one.
Yeah, sure. That's an amazing work.
Yeah.
That's an amazing work. And I think Damien Searle has done a new translation of that as well. I'm going to look for it. 2 years from now, I have another novella coming out with the same publisher, with Guernica. And it's called Doubles. And it's set in 1968 in an institution for troubled youth. And this young girl, 12 years old, gets put there by accident. There's nothing, she's not troubled, there's nothing wrong with her. And she survives by the fact that she's brilliant in math. She's obsessed with math. So I seem to be on a novellas roll, is what I want to say. I wrote these two novellas at different times. I didn't conceive of them as being one book, actually. Each one took about 2 or 3 years. And the way I write is that I write in the mornings. That's when I'm freshest. And I write in my backyard. We have a little coach house, and I'm secluded there, and I turn off the phone, and I have what I need for writing. So
I have a question. Although my mic doesn't seem to work.
we can just pass this back and forth. Just pass it back and forth.
Sorry. I have a question about your coach house in your garden. Because now that I've heard about it, I'm a bit jealous. Is it heated in winter?
It is absolutely heated in winter, and there's running water, and there's even like a little bathtub, but I never use it.
Well, I'm very jealous because I had a shed built in my backyard for the purpose of my writing, but it's not heated. It's almost useless because for 6 months of the year it's actually uninhabitable. Although I've tried to inhabit it in winter, but that wasn't very successful. So there you go.
No, I feel very fortunate, actually. Yeah.
So we've talked about the novella, and my second question is to do with the beautiful physicality of the book, which I mentioned. So I'm very interested. I've very hardly ever seen a flip book like this. It's quite fun. Really. So I just wondered whose idea was that? Was that your publisher's idea, the designer's idea, or was it actually yours?
I wish I could take credit for it. For those of you who haven't seen the book, this is In Sickness and in Health, and this is Yom Kippur in a Gym. And it is the credit for this goes to my publisher, Michael Marola of Guernica Editions. He thought of it. He had already done some books like this, which are informally called flip books. Everyone calls them flip books. Officially or formally, they're called dos à dos or tête bêche. And he had done a bunch of them. And I was sort of intrigued. At first, I thought, oh, this is really weird. But then the designer and I got to work. He did a beautiful job. Both of the covers are fantastic. And I didn't know, though, that how people would react to it, and it turns out to be something that has been fascinated people and excited people, and it's been a real bonus for this book, so that's a great thing.
Yeah, I didn't know your publisher had published other flip books before.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
They've done a few, I think 4 or 5.
Yeah, no, it's quite fun. I often play with it almost in a childlike way, which is quite nice,
And actually, if I may add to this, beyond the beauty and the cuteness and the novelty and all that, there is something about this that's very important to me, because when you publish 2 novellas or even a series of stories, the first thing gets the credit. Everybody knows it by In Sickness and in Health. And then there's a second thing. It's sort of like when I was growing up, we had records. We had 45s, and there was the second side, which sometimes became the big hit more than the first side, but whatever. And here there's an issue of equality, in a way. Neither novella has its feelings hurt. Neither one is secondary. Yeah. Then we had to decide where we put the barcode, which is sort of like the back of the book. But I think of them as equal, and sometimes in stores, I'm sorry if I'm going louder and softer. I ask them to display Yom Kippur in a gym and not just In Sickness and in Health, and they usually are willing to do that.
Why do you ask them to display Yom Kippur? Because specifically?
Because I just don't want it to be neglected.
Oh, yes, absolutely. No, I also love the equality and the sort of balance of it. It's aesthetically pleasing. So I do find that. So now that we've discussed all that, we're going to get to the actual meat of these two books, and we're going to do them one at a time and give them equal time, we hope. And we're going to start because, as Daniel suggested, we're very close to Yom Kippur, of course, with Yom Kippur in a gym. That's why we're starting with that one, not because it's the more important one. Right. So I find this as a novella, the first thing that struck me about this particular novella is its particularly elegant form and very tight. It takes place, if you've read it, entirely over the course of a Nila service, the Nila service of Yom Kippur, which is 1.5 hours, which is, a wonderful structure when you think about it, and very tight. It's just a very aesthetically pleasing structure. To have contained this story in. So that struck me right away. And of course, I'd never thought of such a thing, to a Yom Kippur service. It's just very original as well. And the first question I have for you is, of course, this is a Yom Kippur in a gym, which is not Yom Kippur at Beth Tzedec, which, of course, does not take place in a gym. And it's a very unexpected, of course, title in the first place, Yom Kippur in a gym. And then, of course, we find out that this particular story, in fact, this Yom Kippur service does take place in a gym, and which is, of course, unusual and interesting in its own. And where did that come from, Nora?
Well, I've been told by a lot of people since publishing this book that this is a very odd setting, very startling setting for a gym. Though, on the other hand, when I give book talks, I'm stunned at how many people go, well, of course, I grew up doing Yom Kippur in a gym. So, and actually there have been some services here in the gym at Beth Tzedec, so it's interesting. It may not be that strange, but to me it felt very natural because I spent over 2 decades with the high holiday services in a gym here in Toronto. So to me, it felt very natural. I led part of the services myself, and year after year, I would spend Yom Kippur surrounded by hundreds of people, because it was a big gym, sometimes over 1,000 people, sometimes up to 1,500 people, most of whom I didn't know. And your mind wanders. Ne'ilah is the very end of Yom Kippur, so you're tired, you're hungry, a bunch of things, your mind wanders. And I'd find myself gazing at these strangers around me and wondering who they were and what they were really thinking about. Were they worrying about money, about their health? Were they having a fight with their partner? Were they concerned about a child? Were they lonely? Were they angry? Maybe they were just hungry. And I wondered about this during Ne'ilah, because, especially more than any other time, because, as you know, according to our tradition, this is a very unique time. It's the time when our fate is going to be inscribed for the coming year, according to our tradition. It's a unique moment emotionally, spiritually, psychologically. Our last chance before the gates close to face ourselves, to examine our flaws honestly, nakedly, and commit to changing and improving in the coming year. Or else not. Of course, it's completely up to us. We can decide, I don't need to do anything to change, if you want to do that. So this setting and this moment was very intriguing for me. And in a way, it actually just gave birth to the novella. I was sitting there and just making up things, because I'd look at you, I don't know you, so I make up a story about you. That's what writers do. I've never before had have a setting inspire something that I wrote. That's never happened to me before, so this was quite unique and quite exciting, actually.
Very interesting. Yeah, I know. I must say, I've never. Is unique. It's a unique story, really. And so the second interesting to me thing about this is that you enter. Well, you have 5 characters, actually. The novella concentrates on 5 people who are sitting, congregants, who are sitting in this Nila service, and the writer, Nora, basically takes the point of view of each of these 5 people in turn and explores who they are, what they're doing there, what they think, how they feel. She does this, by the way, through a third-person narration. Which you know what that is. You know, it's he, she, which by the way, I mentioned that specifically because in the other novella we're going to discuss after this, she uses a different kind of narration, including a first-person narration. So that's why I'm highlighting that at this point. So it's a very skillful rendering, third-person narrative rendering of these 5 people. And each of these 5 people is of course, a completely different person with their own problems. And so I guess my question for you, Nora, is it was quite difficult, I would think, in the scope of a novella. It's not a novel, so you can't expound endlessly, you know, to keep this multiplicity of these voices, because five characters is actually quite a lot if you're actually exploring them and who they are. You know, without getting sort of lost in the woods, so to speak, or turning into a novel. So I thought that was very good, how you managed to contain that. And I wondered how, if you had trouble with that, and how you managed. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I created multiple characters in order to showcase the idea of community. If I had to identify just one thing that I think Yom Kippur in a gym is about, I would say it's about the importance and the power of community. And not just any community. This is a sacred community in prayer, and a very inclusive one. I'll talk a little bit about the 5 people later, for those of you who haven't yet read the book, but it is a place where a lot of the people present just walked in off the street. There are homeless people, there are lonely, very isolated people. It's not a community already, but it becomes a community because they're sharing this experience. So for me, it's about the importance of an inclusive community, for instance, like Beth Tzedec, which I feel is wonderful in this regard. And I would say especially that in the times we're living in now, for Israel and for Jews worldwide, it is just so important and powerful for all of us just to be together and to be part of a community. So in a way, this book is a toast or a thank you to community.
I agree. I mean, I was going to say, I didn't really think of that word myself, of community, but you know, that this novella is specifically about a kind of redemption that happens because of community, you know, because of this service. Somehow these people, these 5 people, each in their own way, in their own little life, come to some kind of redemption, you know, whatever their various, they've each got some problem or issue or something. And because of the community that they're in and what happens in the story, they're brought together. So thank you for putting that word on it for me.
Thank you. Well, to comment on your point about numbers and how to juggle so many people, you know, obviously when you're writing about a community, I couldn't showcase 20, 30, 40 people in any depth. I wanted you to be able to enter the inner lives of these people. It's a question really about balancing intimacy and multiplicity, how many you can successfully accommodate. I once had someone make a film of some research I was doing, and he said, never more than 5 girls in the film, right? But here I actually felt that 5 was the perfect number. I sort of thought of it as, you know, 5 fingers on your hand, and you could sort of hold these 5 people in the palm of your hand and in your imagination as you proceeded through the book.
I agree, the number itself is very satisfying. There's something balanced about it. So that is satisfying. So, of course, the Jewish aspect of course, which is where it's Yom Kippur. What do you think the novella's commentary really is on Yom Kippur? Because, obviously there's a range of observances among people, not among all of us. Some of us are more secular, and some of us are more observant and everything. So Yom Kippur often doesn't, I'm not sure if it always coalesces into one meaning for everybody, although we like to think it does. So what do you think, and how do your characters manage that?
Yeah, good question. These are great questions, Dawn. Thank you. I learned something very interesting from writing this novella, and one of them is how I really see Yom Kippur, which I didn't fully know before. Writing fiction, for me anyway, it is very much an unconscious process. Often I'll write for a few hours and I'll take a break, I'll eat lunch, and then later on in the day I'll read over what I've written, and I'll be amazed by it, like, oh, that's what I'm thinking about now. I had no idea. It's frequently a real surprise when what comes out of you, because it's not a rational process. It's not an intellectual process. The editing process is, but the actual writing where it's flowing out of you is not. It comes from a different part of you. So until I'd finished writing Yom Kippur in a gym, I didn't know that I see Yom Kippur, the day itself, as having a kind of magical power. I'm not a flaky sort of person, so this really took me by surprise. But this comes out very clearly in the novella, where Yom Kippur is not just part of the background setting, but it's an active player in the book. It's a force in the book, with its constant prayers and words and music. And actually, I think of words and music as two of the most powerful elements in our world. Yom Kippur is the fulcrum that propels the action in this novella, tipping the seesaw lives of 5 characters just as the gates are closing. In this book, Yom Kippur is a character in its own right, one that is just as important as the other 5. For those of you who haven't yet read the book, here's as you've heard, it's about 5 strangers in a gym. None of them have met each other or know each other. Each one is struggling with a different personal crisis. Lucy can't accept her husband's Parkinson's diagnosis. Ira, rejected by his first lover, is planning suicide. Rachel worries about losing her job. Ezra is tormented by a mistake that he believes ruined his career as an artist. And Tom is having such serious problems with his sisters that he's contemplating severing all contact with them. And then a medical emergency unexpectedly throws these 5 people together, and in that hour, as Dawn said, all their lives are changed in ways they would never have believed possible. And I'd like to add to your point, your important point, Dawn, that I don't think this happens because these are 5 people with particularly strong religious belief. These aren't people with especially strong religious belief. Some of them are very cynical about God and about Judaism and why am I even here? I don't believe anything. And they have doubts of many kinds. Yet Yom Kippur still works its magic. It still has a very powerful effect on all of these people. So to me, this also, which I didn't, again, intentionally put into the book, but it really comes through in this book, that doubting and questioning are not bad things, that they're part of life and of a religious or a spiritual life. And in fact, doubting and questioning are very Jewish characteristics.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I mean, I was thinking to myself, people who are not Jewish will be reading this book, of course, people who've never been in a Yom Kippur service at all. In other words, a real wide range of people who actually really don't know, haven't experienced it at all. And I think it does speak to the multiplicity of the experiences of Judaism, which yet somehow are unified in this service, which is quite very interesting. And which leads me actually to another question, which is, although this is a Jewish thing we're talking about, I think the novella is also universal at the same time, as all good fiction is, no matter how specifically it starts out or how specific it is, which this one is, somehow the story of this whole thing is a universal one. It's a human story, and perhaps you want to talk about that.
Sure. No, I agree. This is both a Jewish story and a completely universal story. In my first book, which was called Marrow and Other Stories, there's a story called The Prayer. And it's about a woman leading Shacharit on Yom Kippur. And after reading this story, some Catholic nuns wrote to me to say how much this story resonated with their experience, because prayer is a universal human activity. And ditto for everything else in Yom Kippur in a gym. Loneliness, failure, fear, doubt, illness, physical or mental, denial, longing for love, self-contempt, family problems, artistic anguish, all of these are just human things. None of these experiences are unique to Jews at all. In this novella, of course, I refract these human experiences through a Jewish lens because this is my culture, and I love my culture. But ultimately, all these emotions, elements, and experiences could be refracted through any culture's lens.
Yeah, and I think there is, I used this word earlier, a redemptive arc in this novella, which is not, obviously you could look at it through a religious lens, but in fact, it's a redemptive arc in other ways as well, about people learning to accept themselves or to accept their problems or coming to terms with their problems, which is not necessarily a religious way of looking at this kind of redemption. So I thought that was very interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I think that's all my questions about this novella. Is that, you want to say anything more about this one before we move on to the next one?
Just one thing about the structure, I would say.
Yes.
I
Yes,
thought
the ingenious structure, which I think I wanted to ask you, which is this single service of 1.5 hours, which I just loved, this idea of this tight structure.
Well, thank you.
About that?
Yeah. As I said, Ne'ilah is a particularly intense. It's a very unique time, and that service itself created for me a kind of container, a tight container, or a tight structure within which this plot could occur. I think when I think about the Ne'ilah service, it has a real ebb and flow. Sometimes you're standing, sometimes you're sitting. Well, this is true of all services, but for Ne'ilah, often you're silent within yourself. I think one does a lot of thinking during that service. Sometimes you're vocal, praying out loud with everybody else. And there are a lot of interesting variations within Ne'ilah. A lot of variation and change, and at the same time, you have certain powerful repeated messages, themes, and invocations that just almost hammer over and over and over at you. And then there's all these beautiful lyrical words and really hypnotic music. So basically, what the structure allowed me to do was to let my characters ride on the wave of this 1 hour service. And they start off on one shore, and they ride the wave to another shore. That was how it looked to me.
Yeah, that's quite beautiful. And what it makes me realize, which I didn't actually think of before, is that, the form of a religious service such as Ne'ilah is actually a literary form, of course. Which I actually never thought of this before. So it's very interesting that you could think of a novella actually, is a form, also a literary form with all these, as Nora says, these ebbs and flows and echoes, which is exactly really what the Ne'ilah service or any religious service in the Jewish tradition is, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's quite a beautiful mirror.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So thanks for making me think of that. I know I'll have to think about that one some more. I think that's a good thing to think about, the literary form as a religious service. So we're going to move on to the next novella, and then at the end you can all ask questions about both. We do it that way?
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
So the second one, which is, here it is, you'll see how attractive it is, in sickness and in health. So, of course, this is not immediately a Jewish themed one, of course. It has not a Jewish title, but we'll get to that in a minute. But what I mentioned earlier was the point of view, which I found the most interesting thing, or among the most interesting things in this novella, is the narrative point of view that Nora chose to tell this story. In contrast to Yom Kippur, which, as I said, was a third-person narrative, where the author Nora speaks in the third person, describing all these people. This novella is told in actually 3 different points of view: the first person, the second person, which is you, and also what's the third one?
Person.
The third person, of course. She, and it. Yeah, and this is very interesting, and we're going to talk about that, or Nora can tell us about why she chose that. But what I wanted to say, the other interesting thing is, this novella is also very tight insofar as it's about really one person, not 5 people, but actually one character. Her name is Lily. As you know, if you read it, and this novella is very tightly focused on Lily, and Nora can answer me now about the point of view changes that she did.
Well, it's an interesting. Your questions really caused me to stop and think, which shows they're very thoughtful questions and meaningful questions. I never think about point of view at all. I didn't think about point of view once in this whole novella, in the process of writing it. I just found myself using second person, you, and I liked it. I know there are a lot of people, I know from speaking to other authors, many of them put a lot of attention on craft. They actually will intentionally they'll say, I want to write something in the first person, or I want to write something in the third person or the second person. I've never done that. There's nothing wrong with doing that. It's just not the way I write. And when I started to notice that I was doing you, a lot of you, I realized that I found it very intimate. For example, the sentence, when you're sick, your body has turned against you. That's a very internal, personal kind of thing. But at the same time, it's completely universal, because you means you're all here today. It's, in English, in more formal language, you would say when one is sick, one's body turns against one. But in North American parlance, more than, for example, in British, we say you. When you're sick, you. So it's impersonal in a certain way and very universal. And yet it's you and you and you. It doesn't get more personal than that. So it's actually a very, very powerful thing, this second person singular. You could do second person plural, you plural, but I focused on the singular here. Yeah.
That's very interesting. What I thought I noticed, in addition to this intimacy that you talk about, is you change to when Lily is sick. So she starts off where she suffers from this malaise, a mysterious malaise, and the pronoun that Nora uses through that section is the you that she's talked about, where she describes you feel sick, you feel like throwing up, you feel this, that kind of thing. Then she talks about her childhood, Lily's childhood, what happened when she was a child. And at that point, I thought you changed to third person. You started saying she. Mm-hmm. So she, this little girl, which is, of course, a distance, because that's a long time ago when she was a little girl. And then finally, you change to the I, the first person, when she's well. So I found, it's interesting that you say you don't plan those changes of points of view, but I found it felt to me very intentional in a good way. That there's an order to it, there's a reason for it. Yeah.
Well, that's very insightful, and I think it's meaningful what you're saying. I think Lily Lily suffers from a mysterious disease, an illness that nobody can understand. The doctors don't understand. She's very sick part of the time, and then she gets well, and then she gets sick again. Her life is trying to deal with this. When she avoids thinking about her past, specifically her childhood, and the only way she can is by creating distance by putting it in the third person. She, had this bad experience, which I think we all do when we want distance from something. She's an artist, so she draws pictures, and then she looks at the pictures and goes, that girl went through this. I haven't thought that much about the I at the end, but I guess I would say that at a certain point, having visited her past and changed because she finally visited her past, there's a certain kind of wholeness that allows her to own an I in a complete way and to be herself. So it's not that I wasn't aware that I was doing these things, but when I wrote them, they happened organically. And that's a really interesting point.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that the I at the end, the story ends when Lily is finally well, or another word for well is integrated, or a number of words, which is the I, owning yourself in your story. She can finally own the past as well. She owns the childhood that she tried to put away, and now she can say, I feel this. It's no longer you, it's no longer she, it's I. So I like that. It's very interesting. So my next question is about the structure. So you also have a very satisfying and tight structure in this novella, which is to do with time as well. Each chapter is a day of the week, and it starts off when Lily becomes sick, or the first day that she's sick, in bed and completely laid up. She can't work and whatnot. So tell me about the structure that you did with the days.
Well, actually, it runs from a Saturday to a Wednesday. I don't know if it's meaningful that the first day is Shabbat. She's not an observant Jew, or there's no evidence of that in the story. She may be Jewish, she may not be Jewish. It's not explicit. I'm very interested and concerned with time. It's a big theme in everything I write. And I think time, its elasticity, really, how it can change when you're sick is a crucial element in sickness and in health. To a sick person, 10 minutes can feel like a full day. Anyone who's sick knows that. And there are different kinds of time. There's qualitative time, which kairos, as the Greeks called it, and there's quantitative, objective time, as the Greeks called chronos, like the word chronology derives from that. So framing this novella within objective time periods, 1 day per chapter, 1 day after another, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, really underscores the subjective aspect of time as Lily experiences it. Some of these chapters are much longer than others, and we know that every day is 24 hours. And some of these are long chapters, and some are really short chapters. So it's really a book, it's really a novella it's about all sorts of things, but it's also about the subjective experience of illness and how it contrasts with, quote, the real world as it seems when you're in good health. Yeah.
Yes, and also, it's just as a reader, it's again, I use the word satisfying, to follow days. We frame our lives in days, of course. Our days are the frame of our lives. So, Sunday, Monday, what's coming next. And then you wonder, as a reader, as the story progresses, what is going to happen on the next day and the next day, the next day. I think it's just a very satisfying frame again. So, I didn't really, as I guess at the outset, talk about the illness, the subject of illness, which is, of course, the subject of this novella. And in terms of, she suffers from this illness from childhood. She suffers epilepsy as a child. It's discovered and diagnosed this terrible, terrible illness, which afflicts her childhood and affects her life, of course, and is a secret. So what interested me, of course, and what I think this novel is very much about, is the attitude towards illness. And in society, as well as within the family, of course, but society at large, it's obviously very stigmatized, as is shown in this novella. This child is made to feel very ashamed of this illness. We can't name it. It's, it's spoken of in euphemism. So I actually had a question about the sociological aspect, which I'm sure is part of your concern. Your background is in social work, as an academic, that is. The sociology of this novella is quite interesting from the point of view of sickness. How do we respond to illness and to sick people, and especially sick women, by the way? That's another thing, another dimension, because, of course, Lily is a woman specifically. So what can you say about that?
Yeah. Well, that's also another broad but also deep question. I think my social work background and the fact that for years I was a therapist with a clinical practice provides me with certain perspectives and insights into people that I wouldn't have otherwise. Regarding the sociological aspect of this novella, since the book came out, a lot of people have asked me why I wrote a book about illness. And I point out to them that this novella is not only about illness, it's also about health. The title is In Sickness and in Health. And actually looking for health and looking at health and actually seeking health rather than pathology is very much what social work does. So in addition to being about health and illness, I see this novella, I keep saying novel because it really feels like it is a complete work, but I have to remember to say novella because it is a novella. It's about women's strength, creativity, resilience. It's about the relationship between the mind and the body, the myth of normalcy, the experience of being different from the people around you, the long-term effects of stigma, and the power of love. Sociologically speaking, this is also about our healthcare system. Lily, who's the main character, has seen 6 male specialists, none of whom understands what's wrong with her, yet all of them treat her completely dismissively. They don't take her seriously, they don't take her illness seriously, and they imply that her symptoms are psychosomatic, or normal for a middle-aged woman. So the sexism and ageism in the healthcare system combine to work against Lily. And unfortunately, I don't think this is a rare experience for many women, especially middle-aged or older women. As a feminist who has conducted research in this area about both mental and physical health, I think it's important for women to write about the experiences that challenge and affect us as women. So there's this whole element in this book. By the way, lest we slide into unfair stereotypes about male doctors, I have a fantastic doctor who has never treated me with anything but the utmost respect and sensitivity. So this isn't bashing male doctors. This is simply highlighting a certain social problem. Yeah.
Yes, and before we get too serious, there's some levity in this novella, specifically, which is which this character actually uses to, I guess, cheer herself up all the time. She has this habit of, she has a whole list of curse words, swear words, and so on, in multiple languages that she's gathered, which she uses all the time. And what do you say about that? It's quite unusual, really. An interesting way of injecting humor.
Yeah. I had a lot of fun doing this. I didn't have to do research for this book except for this. I sent away for jokes and curses from other languages, and it was actually fascinating to read about them. I think humor is a real life force for Lily, as it is for many of us in real life. You know, swearing in foreign languages gives her a great sense of power. In many ways, she's powerless when she's sick. She can't cure herself, but she can still curse the world, and she can curse her situation in it and feel like she's, a witch who's has power, negative power in the world. I think humor is a very important factor in a work of fiction as a way to provide balance with the seriousness of the content. when I'm writing about something difficult, I think about the reader, and my attitude is I don't talk down to readers, and I don't underestimate readers, and I don't think they're weaker than I am. And I figure my thinking about it is if I can take it, they can take it. That's all. We're all people. But at the same time, I wouldn't even want to read page after page after page about someone lying in bed, unable to open her eyes, sweating, wanting to throw up. Like, who wants to, at a certain point, okay, I've read 2 pages of this, like, enough, I don't want to read this. So I want my books to be tolerable, not just tolerable, enjoyable, engaging enough that people keep reading and stay engaged with the character and the plot. So humor plays a very important role in this novella, a lot of actually very funny parts, and it plays an important role in my writing in general.
Yeah, no, it's interesting when you say, imagine a book about sickness. Yeah, that sounds very, very grim and boring. I'm not sure if I'd want to read it, but of course this is, as you point out, not about sickness, but perhaps about a journey towards health. Mm-hmm. And also, what I thought, is it's also a journey from sickness towards health, but a journey within Lily's marriage. We haven't mentioned her husband much here yet, but of course, she is the main character, but she has her husband who's there sort of in the background all the time because she lives with him. I found that, it's very much a journey within their marriage, because she has kept the secret of her childhood, her epilepsy, from her husband, which is a remarkable thing in a marriage to imagine. But of course, all marriages have secrets, as we know. But, this is a very large secret that this character, Lily, kept from her husband. Sort of unbelievably large, really. Not unbelievably, as I say, all marriages have secrets, all relationships have secrets. And the journey is that by the end of the novella, she discloses, as if you've read it, there's this journey of how she manages. And that, again, to speak of redemptive arc, which seems to be my favorite phrase today, a kind of arc towards not only healing, but a healing in the marriage. Because obviously this marriage needed to have that secret disclosed. It was too important. So I guess, Nora, I'm going to ask you a question about that. And of course, just to mention, in Sickness and in Health brings to mind, or I guess you took it from, the marriage oath, which is not a Jewish marriage oath, which is, how does it go? In sickness and in health, till death do us part.
There's more to it somewhat, I forget what.
The vow, the marriage vow, which I believe is a Christian marriage vow, definitely not our marriage vow, however. So I thought that was interesting in itself, that you chose that, and which is why it made me think very much of the marriage. The story is about marriage. And do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, it is definitely a story about marriage, among other things. To clarify one point, and I think there are many layers of secrets in life. Lily's husband, Perry, knows that she had epilepsy as a child. She had it, she got over it, been there, done that. What he doesn't know is what it really has done to her and how it continues to live in her in a certain way. So there are many ways in which we can keep secrets. We can share facts, we can share information, but not share the full reality of an inner experience. So he does know that she had that as a child. And I think Lily's not unusual in wanting to keep secrets. I think we all, as Don said, we all keep secrets. But Lily doesn't really understand the price that her secrets are costing her. She thinks she's getting away with it. None of her close friends know that she ever had epilepsy. Nobody knows. It's just not important, right? But then the price that she's paying is that she begins to feel that the closest people in her life don't really love her, because the person they love isn't the person she really is. They don't know her, so their love doesn't mean anything. So in a sense, she's created this, she's destroyed her own, she's created a framework which devalues the love that she has in her life. to come back to the issue of marriage, the aspect of sickness that's always interested me the most has been the effect on families of living with a person with a chronic or disabled illness, especially in terms of gender differences. When I was a social worker, I worked with families of children with developmental disabilities, and for my doctorate, I studied gender differences in families with children with an autistic boy. And I discovered in my research that the lives of the mothers and sisters in these families were significantly more negatively affected by living with a child with autism than the lives of the fathers and the brothers. In addition, there were often very great strains to the relationship between the mother and father, even in the very strong marriages. And there were strains to the marriages because of the situation in which they lived. So what I chose to explore fictionally in Sickness and in Health was the impact on one particular marriage of living with someone with a chronic illness. Lily isn't chronically ill, but it's called a chronic illness because she's sometimes sick, sometimes well, then she gets sick again, then she gets well again. She's not constantly sick, but she's chronic. It's called chronically sick. So ultimately, among the many questions, there are many questions, not answers, but questions in Sickness and in Health. This novella asks, what are the limits and the power of love when you're taking care of a sick or a disabled spouse or family member? And this is a question faced by many people who find themselves in a caregiver role, whether part-time or full-time. Perry is a part-time caregiver in this novella, but this is very much his experience. Yeah.
So I think I misunderstood that he knew she had.
Well, he had the fact, I had it when I was a kid. That's
right.
The extent to which he knows. But he doesn't really know.
It's put away.
Yeah, it was like in grade 4 I wore pigtails. Okay,
yeah.
That was like that.
So it's a level of secrecy which you point out.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that for me. And so I guess we're going to reach our question period in a minute, but my question, how do you feel this book fits in with your work as a whole?
Oh, that's interesting.
If it does, or if it's a complete anomaly, which I'm sure it isn't.
No. Well, that's another good question. Well, in terms of subject matter, the theme of prayer, to come to Yom Kippur and start with Yom Kippur in a gym, that is something that for over 3 decades I've been preoccupied with, and I only see that looking back. Of course, I wasn't aware of it when it was happening. The title of my story, The Prayer, which I mentioned, which the nuns loved, is actually a pun. So the prayer refers to the woman who is leading the prayers. She is the prayer. But it also refers to the prayer itself. And this pun points to the idea, the experience of how the prayer can become the prayer and the prayer can become the prayer. I think that the parallels, there are parallels that I see, and my interest in this idea is because I see commonalities between the experience of prayer, whether one is davening alone or leading the davening, and the experience of creative writing. In both writing and prayer, at least for me, you are in a certain sense nothing. You lose yourself as in your ego. And at these moments, you're really nothing but a conduit for something to flow through. Yet paradoxically, you are also at these times more yourself, more fully you than at any other time. And Don's nodding as a writer. This comes through very clearly in Yom Kippur in a gym in Lucy's experience when she's leading prayers for the community. In response to this unexpected medical emergency that happens in the story, someone suddenly needs to take over leading the service. And it's Lucy who steps up to do this. Her doing so leads to a profound and a profoundly unexpected personal transformation in her and in her approach to the whole rest of her life. It also affects other people in the gym. Her singing is really beautiful. And talking about the power of women's voices, her leading the prayers actually saves someone's life. Not metaphorically, physically. Literally, it prevents a death. I'm not going to say more for those of you who haven't read it, no spoilers. It saves someone's life. Still, even though this service in a gym is a non-Orthodox Yom Kippur service, there's no mechitza, there's a man in that gym who objects to Lucy leading the service, claiming women should not lead prayers. Fortunately, he doesn't manage to derail Lucy from taking on this leadership role, but he does have a presence in this novella. And I think it's very easy for women to internalize the voice of this type of male. I did a research project in the 80s and 90s at my previous shul, part of my effort to get more women leading the davening. And I called the project Ima's Not on the Bima, which was taken from a children's book named Ima's on the Bima. My mom is not on the prayer podium. And it was fascinating, but it was also very disheartening to hear from dozens of very accomplished women, almost all of whom had active, successful careers, that they felt they couldn't do anything on the Bima in leading services, even though many of them had joined that shul precisely because it offered egalitarian opportunities for their daughters. So I think, fortunately, that younger women nowadays have fewer psychological barriers and blocks than my generation did, our generation did. And it's wonderful. It makes me feel wonderful to see these young women getting up and leading prayers and laning from the Torah and all that. So this obviously, Yom Kippur in a gym fits in not only with my personal history and concerns, but also with my previous books. From my first book, there's a direct arc to this one. As for In Sickness and in Health, and how this fits in with my oeuvre as a whole, I'll only say that the body is a major theme in all of my writing. The body includes illness, of course, but it also includes the joy of the body and the pleasure of being physically alive. So, like Yom Kippur in a gym, In Sickness and in Health is very, very much thematically in line with my overall body of work.
Yeah, no, I just suddenly, as you're saying, talking about the body, of course, Yom Kippur in the gym, while being a spiritual story about prayer, etc., is very much about the body.
That's right.
Because food, of course, is the definition of Yom Kippur, in another sense, the body.
Afflicting the body.
Afflicting, for sure, or depriving the body. And also, one of the characters is a cook. One of the 5 characters that we talked about is actually a cook and a baker, and we see a lot of her thoughts, which are about what her honey cake that she's baked, and her recipes that she's planning. So, you know, the body.
Has an eating disorder. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
so sort of.
Sort of an eating
is that
disorder.
what? Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting thing. Of course, the body is as important as the spirit. Yeah, and I have another question quickly before we open to the floor for questions is, how do you manage to juggle your work as an editor? Because I'm astounded, you know, being a writer is plenty enough, but you are an editor of this journal, this incredible journal. How do you manage to do that? And does it feed your creativity as well, which perhaps it does?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a very positive question. The short answer is yes, but as you heard, in 2010, I founded this online literary journal, Jewish Fiction. And for those of you not familiar with it, you can check it out at jewishfiction.com. We publish first-rate contemporary Jewish-themed writing from around the world that has been written in English or translated from 21 languages. We just actually published our first translation from Ukrainian in our most recent issue, our Rosh Hashanah issue. There are over 600 stories published so far, and it's an exciting time because now, for example, if you want to read a Yom Kippur story, you can go and all the Yom Kippur stories out of the 600 will show up, Bat Mitzvah, Holocaust, Israel, whatever you like, and you can also search by language, Danish, Turkish, Spanish, whatever you like. So working on this journal is a real labor of love. None of us are paid, including my whole team. For all of us, it's a labor of love. And it has nourished me creatively over the past 14 years. Needless to say, there are only so many hours in the day, and from one perspective, and it's accurate to say that the time I put into the journal does not go into my own writing. So there's always a trade-off, but I do love doing it. And one way, there are numerous ways that it's fed me creatively, which is probably why I keep doing it. If I wasn't getting any joy or anything out of it, obviously I wouldn't keep doing it. Since starting this journal, I've had to read many, many submissions. I've read between 5,000 and 10,000 stories, possibly more. I read everything that comes in, and we probably accept one story out of about 20. So if we've published 600, you can do the math, and I read everything. And after reading so many stories, it becomes really clear to you what works in a story and what does not. You know, maybe in the first 5 or 10 or 20, after 1,000 stories, you've learned something, hopefully. You've learned what engages a reader, what feels alive, and what feels dead. And running this journal has also introduced me to a whole treasure trove of Jewish fiction from around the world. The translations, as I've said, for example. So thanks to this journal, I've learned about Jewish fiction in the Netherlands, Albania, Poland, Greece, Argentina, Italy, etc., etc. That's been a joy. It's been hugely enriching. And it's very much expanded my horizons and changed the way I think about Jewish fiction. You know, most people hear Jewish fiction. If your first language is English, you think of English language Jewish fiction. Most Americans think only of American. As Canadians, we also would include Canadian, maybe British, maybe Australian and South African. Hebrew, Yiddish, maybe Ladino, but who really thinks about Turkish Jewish fiction? So it's amazing. It's amazing, the whole thing. And it's also made me part of an international community of writers, translators, and publishers. This amazing network, and more than a network, quote, it's a community. Not all Jews, by any means, by the way. And this has been an incredible, incredible gift to me.
So I suggest you all check out that journal online. It's a treasure trove.
Jewish fiction. If you Google Jewish fiction, it often pops up in the top 3, but it's www.jewishfiction.com.
Yeah. There you go. Is Daniel coming to do the questions? Thank you so much.
We have time for questions. Please raise your hand. I'll bring the microphone to you so that everybody here, as well as those online, can hear what it is you have to ask. Please.
Thank you. I really enjoyed both of the books, by the way. I was confused by the secrecy around the epilepsy, and I didn't know if it was because of the age in which she grew up, or whether or not it was to allow for her redemption towards the end of the story.
Interesting question. Lily was a child in the 1950s, which is a different time than now. I think epilepsy, I know that epilepsy has a very different kind of stigma attached to it than almost anything else.
I wasn't aware of that.
I'm sorry?
I wasn't aware of that.
okay.
Growing up, maybe when I did. Although I was born in the 50s.
There is still huge stigma attached to epilepsy because of its history. The history of epilepsy, and we're talking hundreds of years, and actually perhaps even back to the Greeks, someone said to me, but I haven't verified that. Epilepsy has always been viewed not as a physical disability or disorder, but a mental, spiritual one. You're inhabited by the devil. You're evil. It's very frightening if a person spontaneously falls down in front of you, but if someone falls because they have a weak knee, people don't, it's not the same kind of fear. There is advocacy work. As I mentioned, my background in social work, one of the areas in which I've worked is disabilities, and so I've had an opportunity to view epilepsy versus other things. And there's a lot of excellent advocacy being done in the field of epilepsy, both in Canada and the States, and I'm sure elsewhere. There are also blogs and people sharing experiences, but it really does have a different impact and a different levels of stigma. And I've actually heard parents say when their child is diagnosed with one thing or another, well, at least it wasn't epilepsy. So I thought it was really interesting to explore that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Come over here.
Hi. I did read your books, your novellas,
Thank you.
and I love them.
Thank you.
I have great experience with epilepsy. And I want to tell you that when I had a child who was epileptic, it isn't emotional. I'm contradicting you. Just to throw it out there to think about.
Mm-hmm.
It is so physical.
Oh,
You have
certainly.
no idea. It affects every physicality that one experiences in life, from walking to point A to point B. Insofar as a stigma, I never experienced that in raising my son. For him,
That's wonderful to hear.
I kept him in his own world, which was quite a struggle.
What do you mean exactly?
Because at the time we were going through this, the community of doctors and highly educated people weren't interested. They had a modicum of residences. I don't mean permanent residence, but educational, if the child was educable. Mm-hmm. It wasn't an emphasis I'm talking about the Midwest United States.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It was so underserved. And I want to tell you that I belong to the Association of Mental Retardation, and it has a component of why and everything else. And it's still the case. Doctors, it's still essentially the case with epilepsy. So when I read your book, and Lily experiences as a child, of course, one of her problems was an angry mother projecting disappointment onto her. I think that's what I got from the book.
Thank you for commenting. Certainly, I wasn't saying that that epilepsy is not physical. Of course, it's completely it's the body, and it affects everything physical. And everybody has a different experience. Certainly, in life, everybody has a different experience with anything. So, what I write about in this book is one possible experience, and I'm very glad to hear that your son has had a more positive one.
Whom else?
You can ask anything. You can say anything. Seriously, I've heard everything.
Hi, I absolutely loved your book.
Oh, thank you.
I've been in a lot of book clubs and read really heavy books and lengthier books. This was just fabulous. I've never had two novellas that I read and together, and I just adored them. I think you are a wonderful, wonderful writer. The first one about
Thank
Yom
you.
Kippur in a gym brought me back to my childhood because we had Yom Kippur in the town hall. Our synagogue wasn't built yet. And I thought, what an amazing thing. I remember looking around as a child, who are these people? Like thinking about it, and you took it to a different level. I really loved it. The second one I loved as well, In Sickness and in Health. I just want to know why there was no name given to her illness that she's suffering now. It seemed to be like, why did you do, I understand you women with the chronic fatigue syndrome and they don't take it seriously and so on. Did you want to make that point by not giving her second illness a name, or what was the reason?
Yeah, because there's no name. First of all, thank you. I'm delighted that you love the books. The novellas. at some point I say that it's sort of like chronic fatigue syndrome, but they've ruled that out. So it's unclear what she has. And actually there's a whole category of illnesses like this. They're called the gray zone illnesses. And I spoke to a doctor who is an expert in this area. And there's no name for them because they're not, to have something named, you have to define it. You call Sjogren found Sjogren's, so they know what it is. They don't know what it is, they don't know what causes it, they don't know how to solve it. And so it's just lumped with, we don't know what you have, we've done all the tests, hope you feel better, And I think it's a very interesting question you ask, because we know what it means to be nameless. In the Bible, the point that is often made is that many women are nameless. There are some women named, but there are a lot of nameless people in the Bible, including nameless women. What does it mean to be nameless? I'm not talking about no-name brand. The fact that it doesn't have a name is very significant, actually. Thank you.
We'll take one or two more.
Yes.
Oh, just hang on one second.
Thank you. Can people hear me? Yes? People can hear me? Okay. Yes, so did you or do you feel in some way that her integration into herself of her mother's attitude towards her in some way had something to do with the sudden appearance of this chronic illness?
Did you hear the question? Yes? No. The question was, is there perhaps a relationship between the mother's attitude towards her childhood illness and the emergence of this illness in the way she feels about the illness in her adult life? Well, at a basic level, I don't believe the two illnesses are related. I mean, one is neurological and one is not, whatever it is. There's no reason to see a neurological element. I have no question that the way in which she was raised to view her illness as a child affects the way she views illness as an adult. Obviously, we all grow as people, with or without therapy. We learn to see things in new ways, and we learn to grow. And you can hit a certain point in your life and say, well, just because I thought this when I was 7 doesn't mean I have to think it now. And, I was ashamed of being ill when I was 6, and now I'm 60, and I don't have to be ashamed of being ill. But yeah, there's no question. I mean, obviously for a child, the whole world comes through the eyes of the people and the parents and the siblings and the immediate family, and that has shaped her profoundly, absolutely. You wanted to add something?
We'll bring this back.
I can, but just wait for the others to hear you.
Yes, in some way, you were talking about redemption and about her sort of self-healing, like she suddenly was okay on Wednesday, a much shorter period than usual, and that coincided with the revelation of her past. And so, again, it just she was discarding some of the negative views of herself that she had incorporated into her psyche, so to speak. And so, I don't know, I just found it interesting that there was that correlation, that's all.
No, I agree there's something to that. I think that facing one's past rather than running away from it is generally a good thing to do and a healthy thing to do. And since our minds and bodies and souls are very interconnected, will probably have a positive impact on physical health as well.
I rarely do this, but I'm going to pose the last question.
Woo!
As a Jewish professional reading a novella about Yom Kippur, it intrigued me in a number of different ways. What I wanted to ask about was the setting of the gym is the frame, but the additional decision to have that service be not the primary service of that community, but the secondary service in a different location with the student rabbi, not the full-time rabbi. I'm wondering what went into making that decision and how that, in your mind, was or was not even relevant to the plot unfolding in a certain direction and in a certain way.
Oh, that's really interesting. Well, I didn't want to set it in an established shul. You know, I wouldn't set it in the main sanctuary
Over there on the other side of the wall.
Yeah, I wouldn't set it in Beth Tzedec where people know each other. I was looking for, again, not consciously planned, but it was clear to me in retrospect, I wanted to explore community among strangers and what Yom Kippur did for them. I wanted to pick people who walked in off the street, knew nobody, had nowhere to break the fast, thought maybe they'd kill themselves because life has no meaning. And what could it do for them? That seemed more interesting to me than what Yom Kippur does for somebody who is entrenched in a community, has a stable social life and perhaps career, and isn't alone. I guess I was interested in marginality and marginalia, and also it was crucial for the plot that these people didn't know each other. Now, you know, even though people who come to shul every Shabbat in Beth Tzedec, it's still possible that it's likely they still wouldn't know everybody on Yom Kippur, but you know, they would know a lot of people. And I wanted these people to be lonely and isolated and then to have this communal experience.
So if I hear you correctly, not to say that a service in a gym by default is a group of people who don't know each other, but the opposite, that a service in an established synagogue space is likely a service where people would know each other? Perhaps?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. I mean, of course, what I'm thinking about is a service in a gym that happened year after year, the one that I attended. But because even though it was affiliated with a shul, and so I would always see certain people there that I knew probably less than a quarter of the people. Far less than a quarter. So I think the issue of strangers, what it means to be, I won't say ger because that has another meaning and it doesn't literally translate as stranger, but what it means to be an outsider and a stranger, and what this day means to someone who's really alone. I think that's what interested me, and of course there are people like that in Beth Tzedec on Yom Kippur, even though obviously there are always people who are alone and feel alone and marginalized and are in pain. Obviously, we all are sometimes. But I wanted to create a very specific kind of context for that.
Thank you. I know there's a couple more questions, but I do want to wrap the group session. Just to spin that out, the whole idea of what the two of you being here today has done has brought us all together to hear from you, to learn from you, to do this in community, never mind in a communal space. If only we didn't have a day school here, we would have done this upstairs in the gym. But I want to thank you, Dawn, and thank you, Nora, so much for a very enlightening conversation and for sharing your knowledge and your work and your thought process with us. We are very appreciative. And it's a pleasure to highlight members of our community doing excellent work in the literary field.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you. Our next review, the last one before we break for the winter, is in 3 weeks on November the 20th. We hope we'll see all of you there, as well as people in your lives that you might want to tell about it. As mentioned before, Nora is going to be sitting outside, the opportunity to have your book signed, to purchase additional books. Thank you all for being with us. Have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.
That was wonderful. Yeah. I feel since October 7th has gelled. Oh, well.